deities and temples and deity worship. This morning we got up to the point we were going to talk about Tulasi Devi. Actually, I mentioned just as the last point on the thing about the footprints. I hadn't had it written down this morning when I talked about it, about how I got Prabhupada's footprints for my own personal usage when I left his party in March of 1977. But I fished that up this morning when I went back to the house. So I'm just going to read that because it's a bit more accurate than what I said this morning. So this was on March the 13th of 1977. Prabhupada was in Mayapur. And of course at that time he'd been very, very ill. He seemed to recover a little bit. Then it was kind of up and down a little bit. But I got to a point where I felt confident that if I went to him and asked him for a change of service, that it wouldn't disrupt what was happening with him personally and with his party. He had a few new devotees that came on that were assisting him. So I thought at that point, I could ask if I could have a little break. Because it was a very difficult thing to do. I've been with Prabhupada 16 months. And naturally enough, you don't want to leave Prabhupada's association. At the same time, I also knew that I was getting a bit inattentive in my service, and that was going to affect Srila Prabhupada personally, and it would lead to my creating offences. So I didn't want to get into that situation. And when I told Prabhupada that, he appreciated that. He said, yes, very good. He liked the fact that I was aware enough of my own situation, that I wanted to protect myself from offence. Because previously Prabhupada had various servants, and for different reasons, some of them had left the movement, and I think partly because they took Prabhupada's association a little bit cheaply. Or, as they say, familiarity breeds contempt. They got to a point where they started to see everything as being routine, and to, sometimes make material estimations of what Prabhupada was doing. And I think that led to a few of them having, difficulties in their spiritual life. So I was kind of aware of that, and I wanted to make sure it didn't happen to me. So I'd asked Prabhupada on the 12th of March if I could have a change of service. My idea was that I'd stay in India. I had a British passport, and in those days you didn't need a visa. And at the same time, all the Americans and people that were outside of the Commonwealth, they did require visas, and the Indian government was not very favourable. They were only giving 3 months maximum. And then sometimes if you were really lucky you could get that extended another 3 months. Then you had to leave the country. So that meant we had devotees constantly flying in, flying out, getting new visas, coming back in again. And it was costing a lot of money. So Prabhupada was negotiating with the government that they, give some special recognition to the fact that, our devotees were not regular tourists. We were coming in, we were serious about, developing Indian culture, living Indian culture, Vedic culture, and that we should be given extended visas. And that actually had some effect. Not long after this, then the Indian government did start issuing a new special class of visa. I think they called it the yoga visa. Nowadays you can get 5 years or even 10 years, but in those days 3 months was your max. Anyway, so I was thinking, I've got a British passport, so I'll mention that to Srila Prabhupada, just, he already knew it, but just to kind of reinforce the fact that I didn't have to leave India, because I knew if I left India, that would be it. There would be no chance of coming back on Prabhupada's party. So my idea was that if I had a break for a couple of months, I'd kind of freshen up a bit. And then I could, somehow or another, if there was the opportunity, if I was still in India, I could get back onto the party. So that was my plan. But of course our plans don't always, they're not always rooted in, reality. Reality being Krishna's plan. which we don't often see. So when I first mentioned to Prabhupada about, having a break, he agreed. He said, yes, that's good. But then he immediately asked me, what are you going to do? So I said, well, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. So then he kind of sounded me out about going down to Hyderabad. Hyderabad, I knew, was a sticky situation, and I wasn't really attracted to it. So I frankly admitted, I said, well, I'm not really attracted to going there, but if you want me to go, I'll do anything, whatever you ask me. So Prabhupada said, no, that's all right. So he said, we'll think about it. So that was in the afternoon. Then the following morning, he called me in at 6 o'clock. And at that time, he was having difficulty with a lot of mucus in his chest. So he was sleeping. We had a board underneath the mattress at an angle, just to kind of prop him up a little bit. And he was sleeping like that. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, he called me in, and he asked me to give him a massage whilst he was still on the bed there. So I started massaging him, and then he said, so, have you thought about where you're going to go, what you're going to do? So I said, well, no, not really. And then so he said, so call him. Him meant Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he was the secretary. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj came in, and then Prabhupada said, so he wants to leave me. What should he do? Where should he go? So Tamal was kind of, laughing, and he said, well, I think Hari Sauri's qualified that, any temple in the world would be glad to have him. So that wasn't much help. And then I was sitting there, and there was this thing going on internally that I really didn't want to come out, but it just forced its way out. And during the festival, a couple of weeks before, Bali Madanand, who was just making a bit of a comeback to the movement after being out for some time, he had been made the assistant GBC or something like that to Australia. And I'd seen him there on the balcony outside Prabhupada's room one morning, and he kind of jovially grabbed me and said, oh, here's Hari Sauri, he's a good man, anytime you want to come back to Australia, I'll give you a ticket. He was kind of half joking. Anyway, so I'm sitting there with Prabhupada, and I'm thinking about this, thing about Australia. And I really didn't want to say it, because, I had a bit of intuition about that one. So I told Srila Prabhupada, I said, well, Giriraj is starting up a college program in Bombay, so I could go down there. I said, I have got a British passport, so I don't need a visa. I was sure that when I said that, Prabhupada would say, yes, definitely, you have to stay in India. And he didn't say anything, he just kept quiet. So then I said, I could go to Bombay. I was thinking about, helping with the college preaching there. And again, Prabhupada didn't take the bait. He just sat there, not saying anything. And then this thing just popped out of my mouth. I swear it just forced its way out. I really didn't want to say it. And I said, well, of course, I said I could always go back to Australia. Bali Madan offered me a ticket. That was it. Prabhupada sat straight up. He said, yes. He said, Australia. I was just thinking the same thing myself. And he said, now it is decided. You go immediately. So that was it. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was sitting there laughing like anything. And I just took it, this must be Krishna's desire, super soul that somehow or another forced me to say that. And because Prabhupada was thinking about it. So that was it. It was decided I was going to go to Australia. And Prabhupada told me to go and be Bali Madan's assistant. And as it turned out, actually, there were, at that very moment that we were speaking practically, the Australian devotees had all returned to Australia early. They didn't stay for the second half of the festival because they just bought this new farm, big property, 800 acres, up in northern New South Wales, which became New Govardhan. And they had a balloon payment to make to secure that property, so they all had to go back early and, collect for that. So when they got back, Bali Madan had been in Australia for a couple of months leading up to the festival. Prabhupada met with him in Vrindavan in November, and he'd come asking for service. And Prabhupada had told him, why not go, to Australia, because at that time Guru Kripa he had been the GBC for about 8 or 9 months, but he really didn't want to be there. And he had told Prabhupada that, so Prabhupada was looking for somebody else. Bali Mahadan had been the first devotee to go to Australia, and he started the preaching there. So Prabhupada thought, let him go back there, he was the first man there. So he told him, you go, to Australia. So he'd been there for a couple of months, then he came to the festival, then the GBC ratified that now he's the assistant GBC for Australia. Anyway, when they got back, what had happened was that the Australian temple presidents, they had met together for the first time since Bali's, going to Australia. They started talking, and then they started having doubts about whether he should really be the GBC there, for various reasons which I won't go into here. But there was some dissatisfaction, which none of them really realized the others had until they all got together and they all had the same concerns. So as soon as they arrived back in Australia, they all got together and had a meeting. And after some hours of discussion, they kind of came to a conclusion that they didn't want him there. And they rang up Guru Kripa, who was back in Hawaii, and of course in his typical fashion, throw him out, give him enough incense to pick his fare, So that's what they did. They literally packed his bags for him and put him out the door. It was unprecedented, a GBC, in Prabhupada's time, getting put out the door by the devotees. So Bali then apparently took off, and we didn't really hear where he was for a while, but somebody said that he was headed back to India to see Srila Prabhupada. So in the meantime, Prabhupada had told me to go back to his assistant. So a week later I found out what was going on in Australia. I had to go to Delhi to get a new visa. At that time I didn't have an Australian passport, but I'd had permanent residency. So I had to renew that. And then a couple of devotees turned up in Delhi with this petition from all the Australian devotees saying, we don't want this man back. I thought, great, this is what I'm going into, Anyway, then I got this news that Prabhupada was flying to Bombay for the Pandal there. And when I'd left Mayapur, he was making plans to go down south to Kodai Canal, where there was a hill station. And there was this man, Dr. Singha Ghosh, who was a physiotherapist. And he had given Prabhupada some massages in December at the farm in Hyderabad, which Prabhupada really, really liked. He really helped him. So there was a plan that he would go down to this man's place there at Kodai Canal. And that's what I thought was going on. And then all of a sudden we got a telegram from Tamal Krsna Maharaj saying that Prabhupada's going to Bombay. So I immediately jumped on a plane and flew down to Bombay with one of the devotees from Australia and these petitions. Then when Prabhupada arrived, we discussed the whole thing. And then Prabhupada said, all right. So he said, let the GBCs decide what's to be done. So there was still about 4 GBCs available in India. All the rest of them had gone back to their zones. So after a couple of days, they all met together. And then Bali Mahadan turned up also. So they had a meeting. And then they decided that things should remain as they were. That devotees should not have put Bali out the door. And that he should go back as the GBC and I should go back, as Prabhupada said, as his assistant. So that was, perfectly all right by me. I was fine. Then what happened was that the next morning, after Prabhupada had agreed to that, then the next morning he called Tamal Krsna Maharaj in very early and he said, actually, I've been thinking about it, and he said he should not go back as the GBC by himself. So let the two of them be co-GBCs together. So then Tamal Krsna Maharaj came out to Hari Krishna land. Prabhupada was staying at that time at Kartikeya Mahadevi's house. He was a life member and he was on Marine Drive. It was about an hour and a quarter's drive just to get out there. So he came out and he told me that. Bali wasn't around. I had to inform him. So off he went. So then I found Bali Mahadan and I told him what was happening. And he said, oh, fine, no problem, whatever Prabhupada wants. And then he said, actually, I think you should go back ahead of me you know, get things settled up, and then I'll come when you say. So I said, fine, you know, no problem. Then about midday, then Tamal Krishna Maharaj turned up again. So no sooner had he returned, it took him like 2.5 hours there and back the first time. As soon as he returned, Prabhupada called him in again, and he said, actually, he said, I've been thinking. And he said, you know, Bali Madan actually should not go back. Yeah. He said, so let him stay here and he can manage the guest house in the new temple in Bombay. So that was it. So then Tamal came out and informed me of that. But then there was a question mark, who would be the GBC? It wasn't automatic that I would be. So in the end, what Prabhupada decided was he gave me a letter saying that I was his appointed ad hoc representative. So he didn't make me the GBC, but he did send me back there. So that was it. So I suppose, you know, Krishna knew what was going on, you know, when the first decision was made that I should go back there. And so somehow or another he made this arrangement. So Bali ended up, you know, staying in Bombay, and I ended up going back to Australia. Anyway, that's a bit of background. But to get back to the footprints, eating with the sponge bath. So Prabhupada was recuperating, so I was not giving him too much oil, and we were actually washing him rather than him bathing himself. He was very weak. So we were rubbing him down with wet sponges, and that was how he was taking his bath. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj was there to learn how to do the massage, because he'll have to take over when I leave. So we didn't even really fix up who was going to do the servant's duties. So the atmosphere was jolly, with everybody smiling and happy. Then at the end of the massage, I went out and came back in again and produced 2 sheets of Prabhupada's own letterhead on a wooden clipboard. And I requested Srila Prabhupada that he kindly allow me to take the impressions of his lotus feet on the sheets so that I might carry on worshipping them along with some other personal items of his when I leave. I already mentioned I had his tooth, so that was a plan. So he very readily agreed and made to stand up in order to make the impressions. But I told him that there was no need. He could remain sitting, and I would simply press the sheets up against his feet using the clipboard, if I might be allowed. So Prabhupada said very jovially, you can do anything you like. So he sat patiently while I took the impressions, first of his left foot, and then changing the paper, and then pressing his right foot, and seeing the mark of the mustard oil faintly but clearly on the paper. He smiled all the while, and when I touched them to my head, feeling transcendentally favoured, and then I touched them to my head, feeling transcendently favoured and blessed, then I offered my humble obeisances to him. So just as I reached out to lift him up so that he could go to the bathroom before returning for his sponge bath, Prabhupada said very enthusiastically, now you go out and preach and organise Australia nicely. Make Australia a brilliant success. You've got the capacity to do this. Then he went to the bathroom, and on his return... Hare Krishna. Then he went to the bathroom, and on his return we gave him his sponge bath, and then after that I didn't go into his room again for the rest of the day while I packed. So, anyway, it was a nice exchange. Okay, so that's the footprints. Now we'll talk about Tulasi Devi. So of course that's another aspect of worship, Tulasi Devi. You have so many Tulsi plants here. And that was something we talked about. You know, what Prabhupada thought about worshipping Tulasi Devi, because he was very keen on that. And initially that was one of his big regrets. When he came to the West, then there was nowhere where he could get Tulsi plants. So even though he was establishing deities, he was very unhappy that he wasn't able to offer tulsi leaves to the deities. Then when Govinda Dasi got the temple in Hawaii, the first thing that they did was they grew some tulsi plants, and he was very, very happy with that. And I saw actually in '76 when we went there, they had huge tulsi plants, big ones, 5-6 feet high and big, thick like this. So they were growing outside the front. So Prabhupada was very, very happy with that. So then, not long after she figured out how to grow tulsi, then it started spreading amongst all the other temples, and they started developing systems with greenhouses and heating and special lighting and all these things. And in that way then most temples gradually began to be able to grow her all the year round. Prabhupada did say, I think in other places like Los Angeles, that they should try to get, set it up so that she could grow without the need of a glass house or anything like that, that she would just grow, ordinarily throughout the year. Anyway, on October the 25th, 1976, Prabhupada received a letter from Vidyadasi, who was the Pujari for Tulasi Devi in Los Angeles. So she wrote at length asking about the care of the tulsi plants. She has been experimenting with trying to grow tulsi in the open ground, but has not met with much success. So she asked if they should build a special tulsi house. Prabhupada replied to the affirmative. If it is not possible for tulsi to survive the winters when planted in the ground, then a suitable house can be provided for her. Even the Canadian temples, which have a much colder climate, they are keeping tulsi nicely. So why should there be so much difficulty in Los Angeles, which has such a nice climate? Just do everything very carefully. Tulsi flourishes where there is love and devotion. So that's the real thing, not just the material conditions. So Vidyadasi also included a series of 18 specific questions, some of which I gathered from Prabhupada's reaction he considered a bit trivial, but he answered them nonetheless. As he sat in the sunshine on a straw mat in the back garden receiving his massage, surrounded by tulsi plants growing around the perimeter of the lawn, he listened carefully as Jagadish asked the questions, and he replied them one by one. Question 1. Is each tulsi a separate jiva soul or an expansion of one pure devotee? Answer. Tulsi is one devotee who appears wherever there is devotion to Krishna. 2. Where does her spirit soul go when she leaves her body? Tulsi's body. Answer. Tulsi's body is spiritual. Tulsi's body is spiritual. It means she doesn't leave it. It appears that she's alive or not. But actually, it's all Tulsi. The body is Tulsi. 3. May we place jewellery on her soil or just moonstones? I don't know what you got this thing about moonstones. Answer, yes, jewellery is all right. Question 4. When Tulsi is being cared for by householders in their homes, must 2 artis still be offered? So that was the standard that they used to do Tulsi Puja morning and night. Many temples it's still the same. So Prabhupada answered, if possible. Question 5. When Tulsi is being cared for by householders in their homes, may they use her leaves and manjaris on their offerings, or should they take them to the temple? Answer. Tulsi leaves should be offered to the deity. So if you have deities at home, then. Question 6. When Tulsi is being offered arati by the householders, must she have a ghee lamp? Answer. If possible. Question 7. Is it offensive to turn the baby tulsis back into the soil when they appear? Answer. Yes. Question 8. There are even questions concerning Tulsi's aratis. We have always offered her incense, ghee lamp and flour. Is this correct? Answer. Yes. Question. In the manual, it states that Tulsi should not be pruned. Does this mean also trimming the branches which no longer have leaves or life fluids flowing through them? Prabhupada answered, you may cut the dead branches, but what is the necessity? Question, because we have a mundane idea about plants and how they grow, and you trim off, you know, all the dead, so-called dead branches. That doesn't apply to Tulasi Devi. Question 10. We were told that once you spoke the 4 regulative principles of Tulsi care, which will keep her from getting sick. A. Keep her moist. B. Keep her clean. C. Give her morning sunlight, at least. And D. Give her 2 artis a day. Is this bona fide? Answer, I never said that. It was another one of those Prabhupada says. As Prabhupada said, Prabhupada said, Prabhupada said, Prabhupada never said. So question 11, may Tulsi be made into tea after she has been offered? Answer, no. Prabhupada didn't like tea drinking anyway, but to use Tulasi Devi for your sense gratification just because she's been offered was definitely out. Now I've seen nowadays there's a whole new brand of tea, different kinds of tea and medicines, Tulsi teas. So this is your answer if you want to know whether you should use that or not. No, you can't use Tulasi Devi for your sense gratification. Yeah, Tulsi everything, because it's supposed to be healthy. It's not spiritually healthy to use Tulasi Devi in that way. Question 12. May devotees carve Tulsi wood for deities' paraphernalia? Answer, yes. Question 13. When Tulsi leaves the body and the body is too soft for carving beads, how should she be used? Should a small fire sacrifice be performed? A. Use the wood for beads as far as possible. The balance may be placed within the earth. Question 14. We have a letter from you requesting that no sprays may be used on Tulasi Devi. May we use a spray of buttermilk and whole wheat flour dissolved in water, which coats her leaves to keep the spider mites from causing Tulsi to leave her body? Answer. I said no chemical sprays. Question 15. Does Tulsi sleep? Should she be left undisturbed after nightfall? Answer. Undisturbed means what? Question 16. Is it permissible to use scissors to cut her manjaris when transplanting, and to use knives to loosen her from her pot? Answer. Use common sense. And if you have none, then consult with others. Question 17. Is it an offence to step on or across her shadow, or the shadow of any pure devotee? Answer. You can step over the shadow, but not on it. Now, when Jagadish wrote the answer down to that question, he misheard what Prabhupada said, and he thought that Prabhupada had said that it was okay. Then later on he had to send a correction to Vidya about a month later, telling her that I actually... Because I pulled him up about it, because I saw it, the answer, and then I told him that's not what Prabhupada said. So he had to go and check with Prabhupada again, and then Prabhupada told him, no, you can't stand on the shadow. And so he sent a correction later, I think early in January he sent a correction telling her that no, you can't stand on the shadow. It's interesting that, because if you... some of you may recall the story about Ramanujacharya and how he raised the money to build the Ranganath temple in the south there, at Sri Rangam. He had 3 disciples who had mystic powers. One of those mystic powers was that by standing on the shadow of a person you can immobilize them. Yeah. Somehow or another the shadow is also connected to this subtle body, and by simply standing on the shadow, then the person couldn't move anymore, and then they would rob them and then let them go. So same thing, if you stand on the shadow of a pure devotee, it's an offence actually. So you have to be very careful when you're doing your Tulsi Puja in the mornings, how you have the lighting. Yeah. So last question, number 18. For 2 years we've been waiting permission to use the following 2 prayers, plus translations, and translations of the already existing prayer. Please tell us if these are bona fide. So there's one, it says, Govinda Vallabham Devim Bhakti Chaitanya Karanam Snapayam Jagat Bhartim Hari Bhakti Pradayanim. Now I am bathing the Mother of the Universe, the bestower of Krishna Bhakti, the enlivener of the living force of the devotees, and the dear one of Govinda. And the next one, Chayanod Bhavadukan Cha Yadvidi Tavavartate Tat Shamashva Jaganmata Vrindadevi Namostute. O Mother of the Universe, please forgive whatever misery exists in your heart caused by the cutting of your leaves. O Vrindadevi, let me offer my obeisances to you. And then the third one, Om Tulasyam Rita Jamasi Sadatwam Keshava Priya Keshavartam Chinomi Twam Bharada Bhabaso Bane. O Tulsi, you were born from nectar and are always dear to Lord Keshava. Now, for the service of Lord Keshava, I am cutting your leaves, O one who is shining brightly. Answer: don't try to introduce something new. The most important thing is the love and devotion. So he didn't say yes or no, but just don't complicate things, that's all. Do it simply and with love and devotion, and then it doesn't matter if you chant these mantras or not. So I was particularly interested in the answer to question 17. That was about the shadows. There are many tulsi plants growing in the garden here in Vrindavan, and when Prabhupada comes out to take his massage, a shadow casts across the pathway. I've never considered that it might be an offence to tread on it, but now I know, and I'll take special care to step over it in future. So, that's all I have about Tulsi worship on that one. Now you asked about Shalagram Shila worship. So just a little bit about that. So on January the 17th, 1976, Mayapur, on Prabhupada's arrival, entering the ground floor temple room, Prabhupada greeted the beautiful brass forms of Sri Sri Radha Madhava. Sri Shalagram Shila is also present, Mayapur being one of the few ISKCON temples in which Srila Prabhupada has so far sanctioned his worship. So as I mentioned the other day, at that point there was hardly any temples in ISKCON that had Shalagram Shilas. Mayapur was one. Later Prabhupada gave a permission to Koladri to worship Shalagram in New Vrindavan. And I think in Bombay also they started to make some arrangement. That actually, I think, comes up here. Anyway, so there was another exchange involving Shalagram Shila, Juniors. So that was on August the 21st, 1976. These South Indian Brahmins, they'd done the installation of the deities and the opening of the temple in Hyderabad. And then, after that was all completed, they stayed for Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja. And then, on the 21st, then they were headed out. So Sampat Kumar Bhattacharya and his men came up to Prabhupada's room to bid him goodbye. They expressed great happiness with the installation and considered it an honour to have been invited to conduct the ceremonies. Equally appreciative of them, Srila Prabhupada urged them to sustain this spirit of cooperation and to help spread Krishna consciousness to the world. He happily posed for a photograph with them, and he accepted a gift of a Shalagram Shila from Sampat Kumar before they left. So then, later on, Srila Prabhupada had arrived from Bombay last night, and Prabhupada eagerly heard from him and Gopal Krishna Prabhu as he took his massage. Prabhupada was keen to know about the Janmashtami festival, especially since the preliminary report suggested that only 600 guests had attended, because the temple wasn't open at that time, but it was being built, and the devotees had made some kind of pandal. So we got some report there, only 600 people. Saurabh assured him that the festival had been a big success, and he had estimated at least 20,000 visitors had come over the 2-day period. He said people had crammed in everywhere, even sitting on the unfinished balconies and on the scaffolding. Referring to the low estimate, Prabhupada wanted to know where it had come from. Who is that nonsense who came and said this? Who is that rascal? Gopal Krishna sheepishly revealed that it was a 13-year-old boy. Prabhupada shook his head in mild disgust. Oh, you believe a boy? He is authority? Here is the authority. Oh, you have taken the information. How do you believe just a boy? Anyway, so pleased was Prabhupada with Saurabh's news that he offered the Bombay temple the Shalagram Shila that Sampat Kumar had just given him. Shalagram Shila has already been worshipped in Mayapur, and now the Bombay temple is becoming well established. He's decided to expand the worship. So then not long after that, then Pradyumna came into the room. So Prabhupada turned to Pradyumna Prabhu. He asked him if he would like to personally worship the Shalagram Shila that was given to him by Sampat Kumar, which was still sitting on his desk. He obviously had changed his mind about giving the Lord to the Bombay temple. Pradyumna was readily agreeable, and so Prabhupada gave him some simple instructions. So we can carry, and every morning you just put on a singasan and tulsi leaves and water and flour and a little fruit. That's all. Then turning to the rest of us, he said, he has got the tendency to worship. He's a Brahmana, Pandit, Gagamuni added. Panditji, Prabhupada smiled, calling Pradyumna by his popular sobriquet. Gagamuni mentioned that Pradyumna was also training his son, Aniruddha, and Prabhupada smilingly added, yes, his son will be a great Pandit. Both of them are devotees, husband and wife, and therefore nice son is born. Yata bijam yata yoni. Yoni is the mother, bijam is the father. That's interesting because when the question, sometimes there's divorce in the West, and then the question of custody comes up. Prabhupada's view of that was that the children belong to the father. In the West, normally, it's always the custody goes to the mother. But according to this Vedic aphorism, yata bijam yata yoni, that the womb, the mother, she's providing the shelter for the seed. So Prabhupada said, when you make a deposit in the bank, right, with your money, the money is yours, it's not the bank's. Similarly, when the father deposits his seed in the womb of the mother, the seed is his, not the mother's. So even though she gives shelter and she nurtures and develops the baby, according to Vedic law, the children actually belong to the father. Anyway, just a little observation there. Of course, nowadays we don't follow the Vedic rules, but so Prabhupada digressed a little, fondly recalling how his own father, following the advice of his spiritual master, always travelled with a Shalagram Shila hanging around his neck, wrapped in a linen handkerchief. Yes, so it is safe always. Kanta. Kanta means throat. My father used to carry. Wherever he would stay, Ganga Jal, Tulsi, and decoration. So, say, half an hour's business. So my father was a great devotee, yes. You dedicated your Krishna book to him, Gopal Krishna recollected. Prabhupada smiled. Yes, because he was a pure Vaishnava, and he wanted me to become like this. He was praying to Radharani. And any saintly person that would come, he would simply say, you give your blessings to my son that he may become a Radharani's servant. That was my father's prayer. He never prayed that my son may become a very rich man. He never prayed like that. Actually, his ardent desire was that his son may become a Vaishnava. And my Guru Maharaj's training, that has put me in this position, so that I have admitted later on. What is that word that I have given? Just find out. So Gopal Krishna knew exactly what Prabhupada meant. He quoted, which was later on solidified by my eternal father. Prabhupada's eyes lit up. So read it. Gagamuni read Prabhupada's dedication from the front of the Krishna book. To my father, Gaur Mohan Day, 1849 to 1930, pure devotee of Krishna, who raised me as a Krishna-conscious child from the very beginning of my life. In my boyhood ages, he instructed me how to play the mridanga. He gave me Radha Krishna Vigraha to worship, and he gave me the Jagannath Rathayatra to duly observe the festival as my childhood play. He was kind to me, and I imbibed from him the ideas later on solidified by my spiritual master, the Eternal Father. As we expressed our appreciation, Prabhupada's features softened with natural humility and affection. That is a fact. I got a good father and a good spiritual master. Gagamuni contrasted that with our fortune. Oh, we've gotten a bad father, but now we have a spiritual father. But Prabhupada didn't agree. No bad father. Unless good father, the son cannot be good. Yata yoni, yata bijam. He added that his father had never chastised him. I thought I remembered him saying that his mother was always very strict, and so I mentioned this. Prabhupada smiled, because he was very lenient, so my mother had to be a little strict for my education. So as the meeting broke up and everybody filed out, Prabhupada finalized Pradyumna's new duty with him. He told him to buy a small Singhasan, a Panchapatra water pot, and some fine linen from which he should make a small dhoti and chadar for the Lord. He was to worship him with flowers, tulsi and gopi chandan. He offered him the painting. He referred him to the painting in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, where Sri Advaita Acharya was depicted worshipping the Shalagram Shila, and he told him to follow that example. He instructed Pradyumna, first thing is that when you take the Shalagram Seva, then wherever you stay, this worship must go on daily. That you cannot stop. One day, if you were sick, then your wife will do it. But you cannot stop. But in half an hour, the puja, But a half-hour puja, that must continue. That you must decide. So both of you are initiated. So in case you're a little sick, then your wife can do it. In that platform you have to do. Seva shall not be stopped. Gradually, as your son grows, then he can also do it. So although Prabhupada sometimes complains about Pradyumna's smarta brahmana tendencies, he once told me that he had saved Pradyumna from becoming a smarta brahmana. Still, he recognizes his good Brahminical qualifications and learning, and is always encouraging him to develop them. So he immediately began. And then the following week, just 1 week later, we were in New Delhi. So when we returned to the temple from the morning walk, Prabhupada greeted their lordship, Sri Sri Radha Parthasarathi, and then he mounted the Vyasasan for Guru Puja in class. He noted the absence of Pradyumna and inquired where he was. So whilst the puja was going on, he called me over. He said, "Where is Pradyumna?" So when we informed him that he was doing his puja, worshipping his newly acquired Shalagram Shila, Prabhupada was not at all happy. "First of all, Guru Puja," he said with annoyance. "You tell the nonsense. First of all, Guru Puja." I had to run from drag him down and bring him in. So you've got to get your priorities right. That's the point. Guru Puja first. So, Dwarka Shila. That was another thing that came up one time when I was with Prabhupada. This was on January the 6th in 1976. Prabhupada was in Nellore, and after the morning walk, the sannyasis gathered in Prabhupada's room. Yashodanandan Swami showed him what he said was a Dwarka Shila, a brown and white freckled stone, and he asked if it was all right to worship. "It can be used as a paperweight," Prabhupada said, unimpressed. When Yashodanandan Swami mentioned that some temples worship the Dwarka Shila along with the Shalagram Shila, Prabhupada was dismissive. "That's all right, but we have no such instructions." I don't know whether you have one here or not. It's become a fashion. Everybody thinks now we have to have the so-called Dwarka Shila, but Prabhupada was very clear about it. We have no such instructions. Okay, so that's all I've got on deities. And there was some things on Lord Jagannath, but I didn't have time to put them in. So,
was the reason Prabhupada didn't want his work worshipping Dwarka Shila, was that because we worship Krishna in Vrindavan and Dwarka is on reverence because of...
I don't know the reason. We never pursued it. No, I mean, Yashodananda never asked Prabhupada why, and we never took it up, and I never heard any mention about Dwarka Shilas, I don't know whether there is such a thing as a Dwarka Shila. We know there's a Govardhan Shila because we know that Govardhan is the same as Krishna. And you have to worship Govardhan Hill. We know that there is a Shalagram Srila because, you know, it's in the Shastra. He's none different from Narayan, but I don't know if there's any Shastric reference about a Dwarka Srila. You know, maybe somebody could look it up. And of course, you're saying there that maybe it's because, you know, it's a different mood or rasa or whatever. But of course, Prabhupada did name the deities in Los Angeles Rukmini Dwarkadish, and he called the place New Dwarka. So I'm inclined to not think that that's probably the reason. I don't know. Somebody can look it up and see if there is such a thing. As Prabhupada said, you can use it as a paperweight. So, any other questions or comments? Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, on the worship of Shalagram Srila, did Srila Prabhupada specify that only a Brahmana can worship Shalagram? Because there's some people take Shilas and they worship them and they don't say.
No, Prabhupada was very clear, you must be a Brahmana. Just the fact that he was so cautious about having shalagrams on the temple altars shows you what high standard, you know, it requires. Although the mode of worship, I mean the actual method of worship may be very simple. As he said, you put some Ganga gel, tulsi leaf is essential, and a little chandan for decorating. But apart from that, nothing much more is required. But still, it has to be done, you know, by a qualified Brahmana. And therefore he told Pradumni that you're initiated, your wife is initiated, so she can also do like that. But definitely not for non-Brahmanas. Very risky. You know, if somebody's not up to the Brahminical standard, they shouldn't be touching a Shalagram Srila, that's for sure.
Because I'm just beginning of the class, so I don't know something listening whether you cover, but in relation to Tulasi Devi, sometimes we have this difference written by Tulasi Devi, I create this Vishnu Bhakti or Krishna.
Okay, that's come up before. There's not really any difference, Vishnu Bhakti or Krishna Bhakti. I learnt Krishna Bhakti, and so I always sing that. Other devotees, they learnt Vishnu Bhakti. I overheard a conversation once between Achyutananda Swami, who had put together the first ISKCON songbook, and he had compiled all those prayers and sent them to Los Angeles, and he had complained that they had changed Krishna Bhakti for Vishnu Bhakti. But I don't think it makes any difference. You know, Vishnu and Krishna, same person. And so different, little different mood or aspect, but same person. So, any other questions? Okay, so now it's 7:43. We can continue if you like, or we can do another topic and start tomorrow, whatever you want. What would you like to do? Yeah. All right. So what I'll do, let me just see if I can find this one thing about Lord Jagannath. It was an interesting pastime. Oh, here we go. All right, one final thing about installation of Lord Jagannath. This was a really interesting pastime. This was at Hyderabad. I already mentioned about how Prabhupada had corrected them about the colour on the hands of Gaunitai when they were about to install them. So on August the 17th in 1976 then, I was in the sitting room just after completing Prabhupada's evening massage. This was very late, this was about 11 o'clock at night. And Prabhupada's rooms were kind of like, it had a small balcony that overlooked the temple room. So it was almost like a mezzanine level. And Mahamsa had designed it. He put this hole in the wall, in a very small balcony, because he thought it would be nice if Prabhupada could come and sit on the balcony, and then all the people that were in the temple room, they'd be able to have his darshan without him having to come down. And also, from that balcony, you could see the altars as well, so Prabhupada could, look down into the temple room. So, I just finished the evening massage when I heard the strains of a vibrant kirtan, punctuated with the cries of excited devotees coming from the temple room. Parting the velvet curtains, I looked. They hadn't put a door in at that point, there was just a curtain. So, parting the curtains, I looked down and was surprised to see Lord Jagannath come marching in through the main entrance. The South Indian Brahmins were assisting the Lord by holding his arms as they walked him with a side-to-side motion across the checkered marble floor to a spot just in front of the altars. It was really nice, and a group of our men, led by Mahamsa and Yasodanandan Swamis, leapt and danced, beating mridangas and kartals, as one by one Lord Balaram and Lady Subhadra came in to join him. As each of the transcendental trio entered, rocking and swaying, and made their way to the front of the deity room balcony, the devotees and a growing crowd of curious onlookers became more and more elated. The deities were beautiful, each standing about 3 feet high. They were carved by the same artisan who had made the main deities in Jagannath Puri. As they stood in a line waiting to be hauled over the balcony balustrades up into the deity room, the devotees gathered in front of them and unleashed their youthful exuberance. Their enthusiasm for the holy names soon swept up the normally staid, middle-aged South Indian Brahmanas into the throng, and they also began to clap, sing and dance. As the chanting increased in intensity, one of the visiting Brahmanas, a bearded fellow with long greying hair, abruptly stopped, standing stock still. His body stiffened, and he threw his head back, rocking it back and forth and side to side. Baring his teeth like a big cat, he clawed the air with his outstretched arms. He was like this. Seemingly oblivious to his surroundings. He remained in this mesmerized state for several minutes, his eyes widened and unblinking, as he repeatedly snarled and cleaved the air. Our devotees, a bit bemused by his exhibition, nevertheless continued with their energetic dancing and chanting. Suddenly, reaching an apparent peak of entrancement, the Brahmana fell stunned to the floor. His compatriots quickly gathered around him, and then after another minute, they helped him to his feet. He was uninjured and still wrapped in the kirtan. The Pandits then all abandoned their sedate dignity and wholeheartedly joined in the chanting and dancing, raising their arms and voices, and even leaping high into the air with their youthful hosts. When the kirtan finally ended, the deities were taken into the deity room ready for their installation tomorrow. I found out later that the bearded Brahmana was a pujari of Lord Nrsingadev in Bangalore.